In 2021, while the world was still trying to recover from months of isolation, a Pixar movie arrived without making much noise. No American theatrical release, no massive marketing campaign, no lines at the box office. It simply appeared on Disney Plus on a Friday in June and went straight into people's living rooms. And you know what happened? It became the most watched streaming movie of all of 2021, with over 10.6 billion minutes of viewing time worldwide. 10.6 billion minutes. Think about what that means. Even without playing on the big screens of American cinemas, even without that premiere buzz that Pixar movies always have, Luca went straight to people's hearts. And yet, when you ask any animation fan about the great Pixar movies, Luca is almost always left out of the conversation. It lives in the shadow of Soul, Coco, and Inside Out. It's as if the world watched the movie, fell in love with it, and then tucked it away in a drawer without fully understanding what they had just seen. But I think that's exactly the point. Luca wasn't made to impress you. It was made to remind you of something. This movie is a return ticket to the summer of your life. Not the summer of a specific year, the summer that exists in the emotional memory of almost everyone. That time in childhood or pre-adolescence, when the days seemed to last forever, when a new friendship could change everything, when the world seemed immense and full of possibilities, and we weren't yet afraid to dream out loud. Luca captures this with a delicacy that few movies achieve. It does so in a way that looks simple on the outside, but goes deep when you truly pay attention. It was directed by Enrico Casarosa, an Italian from Genoa who spent much of his life drawing, dreaming of cinema, and carrying within himself a story about friendship that needed to be told. Casarosa didn't invent Luce from scratch, he pulled the film straight from his own memory. The character Luce is based on himself as a child, a shy, curious boy, full of dreams kept locked in his chest that he never dared to show anyone. And the character, Alberto Vetbreva, Messier, more intense friend, is based on a real friend named Alberto Cirossi, whom Casarosa befriended at 11 years old. The film is dedicated to him, and in the feature, Alberto Cirassi makes an appearance voicing a fisherman in the Italian version of the movie, a detail that, when you discover it, completely changes how you see the relationship between the two protagonists. It's this level of detail, of emotional truth, that you feel in every frame of Luca. Nothing there was invented out of convenience or formula. Everything has a real root. And that's why, despite being an animated movie about sea monsters in a fictional Italian town in the 1950s, the story hits the nail on the head regarding something completely universal. What Casarosa wanted to say with Luca is simple and at the same time profound. There are friendships that change who you are. There are people who arrive in your life at a specific moment and push you out of your comfort zone in a way you never could have managed alone. And when those friendships transform, not necessarily in a dramatic way, but just because life goes in different directions, that summer remains guarded forever as something that shaped an essential part of who you became. That is Luca. And that's why it works so well. From a creative standpoint, Luca is a bold choice in a catalogue of movies that tend to be huge, loud, and emotionally devastating. Pixar has accustomed us to stories that extract tears with almost surgical precision. Think of Soul. Think of the beginning of Up. Think of Inside Out too. Luca goes in a completely different direction. It is smaller. It is quieter. It is almost a European art film disguised as an American children's animation, and Casarosa did this on purpose. Inspired by classic Italian filmmakers like Federico Fellini and the Japanese animator Hayao Miyazaki, whose films he consumed with passion since childhood, this set of influences gives Luca a visual and emotional texture unlike any other Pixar film. The animation has a more stylized, more painted, more imperfect style on purpose. The colors are saturated in a way that makes the Italian sun feel almost physical on the screen. The characters' movements have an expressive, cartoonish quality that makes you smile before you even realize you're smiling. The movie feels like a hand-drawn summer sketch, and that is absolutely intentional. But before diving deeper into all of this, the production, the artistic choices, the behind-the-scenes stories, the reception, and what the film represents in Pixar's catalog, it's worth establishing one thing first. Luca is, at its core, a coming-of-age story. It's about the moment when a child begins to see the world beyond the limits that were placed around them. It's about the moment you discover there is life beyond what your parents told you was safe. It's about the courage to be different and finding someone who makes you feel that being different isn't the end of the world. And the detail that transforms this entire message into something even more powerful is that, in this movie, being different literally means being a sea monster trying to pass as human. Luca and his friend Alberto are sea creatures who transform into humans when they dry off. In the town of Portoroso, where the story takes place, humans are terrified of sea monsters. So Luca's whole life is built around hiding who he really is, first out of obligation, then out of fear, and later when things get truly complicated. By his own choice, Casarosa has made it clear in interviews that the sea creature is a metaphor for any form of feeling different. It could be adolescence. It could be the experience of being an immigrant or a foreigner in a new land. It could be any identity that a person feels they need to hide to be accepted by the group around them. The film never locks this metaphor into a single interpretation, and it is exactly this openness that makes Luca a movie that people with completely different life experiences can watch and feel was made especially for them. In the years following its release, Luca received a particularly warm reception within LGBTQIA+ communities, who saw in the story of two boys hiding their true nature from the world a direct allegory for the experience of growing up having to hide an essential part of oneself. Casarosa said this was not the original intention of the film, but that he welcomes with open arms any reading the audience brings to the story. And this is yet another sign that Luca is a richer film than it appears at first glance. Throughout this video, we are going to go through everything. We'll talk about how Enrico Casarosa turned childhood memories into a movie pitch and spent 5 years developing this story until it became what hit the screens. We'll dive into the animation, the extraordinary visual choices that make Portoroso feel like a place you've visited even if you've never been to the Italian Riviera. We'll talk about the voice actors, the soundtrack built by Dan Roma with accordion and orchestra, and the behind the scenes of a movie made entirely in the homes of Pixar employees because of the pandemic. And we'll discuss where Luca fits into the studio's history, what it gets right, where it could have been more, and why, despite that, it leaves a lasting mark. Because in the end, what Luca does with absolute mastery is something most movies don't even try. It gives you back a feeling, not a thesis, not a moral of the story explained didactically, a feeling. That strange mix of joy and longing we feel when we remember a younger version of ourselves, freer, more scared, more alive. And that, believe me, is much harder than it looks. Genoa, Italy, late 70s. A shy, well-behaved boy raised in a family that was overly protective. This boy spent his summers on the Italian Riviera, swimming, drawing, listening to stories of sea monsters that the older fishermen told at the edges of the ports. He loved to draw, he loved to invent worlds, but he was the kind of child who was more comfortable inside his own imagination than adventuring out in the real world. That boy was Enrico Casarosa, and it was during one of those summer seasons in the Cinque Terre region, those 5 fishing villages hanging on the cliffs overlooking the Ligurian Sea, painted in orange, yellow, and pink, that Casarosa met the boy who would change his life. He was 11 years old. The new friend was named Alberto Surrosse, and Alberto was everything Enrico wasn't. Bolder, messier, looser, more willing to do the wrong thing for the right reason. He was the kind of friend who comes into your life and tells you, just by existing, that the outside world is much more interesting than it looks from your window. Casarosa described this friend in interviews as a little troublemaker. Someone who dragged him into adventures he never would have had the courage to seek out alone. And it is exactly this dynamic that fuels the heart of Luca, not a screenwriter's invention. A real memory, kept for decades, that needed a place to exist outside the head of the person who lived it. What happened next makes this origin even more special. Casarosa got older. Genoa was left, moved to the US, became an artist, worked at Industrial Light and Magic, and then finally made it to Pixar, even though they lived far apart. And for a long time, their friendship with Alberto Surrosse never died. When Luca was finally let go in 2021, the two friends got back together in Italy for the movie's premiere. They swam together again in the same waters of the Cinque Terre where it all began. Years ago, it felt like we were having one last adventure together because of this movie, Casarosa said. That was something completely special. And there's more. The whole movie is about Alberto Surrosse, not just a generic dedication at the end of the credits. The movie itself is a way for a man to thank the friend who pushed him to become who he is. Casarosa had already made a big impact at Pixar before. Luca, he directed La Luna in 2011. It's a delicate, almost dialogue-free 7-minute short film about a boy who goes with his father and grandfather on a boat trip at night to sweep the moon. The movie was nominated for an Oscar for Best Animated Short Film and got a lot of attention in and out of the industry. In 2012, it was the first movie shown in American theaters before Pixar's Brave. La Luna showed what kind of filmmaker Casarosa is more than anything else. Someone who prefers suggestion to shouting, subtle emotion to big drama, and silence that means more than 10 lines of dialogue. A lot of people who saw La Luna probably didn't know they were seeing the emotional beginning of Luca. After La Luna, Casarosa worked at Pixar for years as a story artist. This is one of the most important jobs in the making of animated films because it involves storyboarding and giving the script a visual shape. He did this job on Coco, which is one of Pixar's most technically and emotionally complex movies. It was also during this time that he started to work on the idea that would become Luca. The first draft of the story was very different from what was shown on TV. Casarosa's first idea didn't have anything to do with sea monsters or the Italian Riviera. The original idea was about an Italian father and his American daughter. It was a story about bringing a family back together after being split between two cultures and going back to their roots in Italy. It was personal in a different way, but it still wasn't the right story for him to tell. He started to ask himself, what is the story that I haven't told yet? And that was the turning point. And the answer was this: one friendship, that summer. Alberto Surase, the shy version of himself who could only be brave because he had a friend who thought that adventure was always a good idea. During the development process, the choice to use sea monsters as a metaphor was carefully thought out. Casarosa was trying to figure out how to show what it feels like to be different. This is something that every preteen knows about, having a part of yourself that you can't show everyone, that you need to keep hidden, and that feels dangerous to show. The Italian Riviera's sea monsters, which fishermen talked about in stories from the past with real seriousness, became the perfect metaphor. Animals that are different in the water than they are on land. People who are always afraid that if anyone finds out who they really are, everything will fall apart. Before filming started, Casarosa spent about 5 years working on Luca. As part of this process, a number of Pixar artists were sent on research. Trips to the Italian Riviera. They went to the Cinque Terre, Porto Venere, Sestri Levante, and other coastal villages to take notes on the architecture. Light, plants, colors, textures, and daily lives of the people who lived there. These trips were very important in making Portoroso the made-up town in the movie. It has a level of geographic and cultural detail that goes far beyond what a normal children's cartoon would need. In Portoroso, every street, every clothesline, between windows, every boat in the port, and every shadow the late afternoon sun casts on the colorful walls were all based on real things. It feels like the town is real, but it isn't. And that feeling of being real is one of the best things Luca gives the viewer. Portoroso means red port, which is a pinkish port. People who have seen pictures of Porto Venere or Vernazza know exactly what kind of pink that is. The warm, faded color of stone buildings that have been exposed to the salt and wind of the Mediterranean for years. But let's go back to the development process. From the start, Casarosa had a very clear movie. Reverence in mind. He had been a fan of Hayao Miyazaki for a long time. Miyazaki is the Japanese director of Studio Ghibli, which made the classic movies Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, and Castle in the Sky. You can see and to some extent, hear Miyazaki in Luca. The idea of a fantastic world living alongside the real world without much explanation, the obsessive focus on environmental details, and the young characters learning about themselves by having to deal with a world that is bigger and more complicated than they were ready for all of this. Is Miyazaki reinterpreted in a Mediterranean setting and a visual style that is clearly Pixar. Several times, Casarosa publicly confirmed this influence, naming Castle in the Sky and Nausicaa as visual and narrative reference points during development. But he did more than Miyazaki. He also said that Federico Fellini's movies, especially Amarcord from 1973, which is about childhood and teenage memories in a seaside town, had a direct effect on Luca's emotional texture. He also said that the characters' looks were inspired by classic Italian comic books, especially cartoonists from the 1950s and 1960s. All of this research and cultural baggage went into making a movie that looks simple on the surface. And that's not being careless. it's being in charge. Casarosa didn't want to make a movie that was too obvious about where it got its ideas. He wanted to make a movie that made them feel so deeply that they became invisible, leaving only the story and the feeling behind. One of the most popular parts of the movie is Silenzio Bruno, which is a central idea that Casarosa came up with just for the script. It's how Luca and Alberto learned to quiet the voice of fear, doubt, and insecurity that was inside them. They named this voice Bruno and learned how to get rid of it whenever it tried to mess up their plans. Casarosa said that this idea came from his own life. When he was young, he had to silence Bruno's voice in order to have the courage to dream out loud, try new things, and trust the friend who pushed him forward. When you understand where this personal story comes from, Silenzio, Bruno stops being just a funny part of the movie and becomes a statement. It's not just made up. In an animated movie, a man who learned the hard way that the only way to grow is to tell Bruno to shut up and take the leap gives real advice. And that's exactly what Enrico Casarosa did for 5 years while he worked on the movie. He silenced his doubts, trusted the story he had inside him, and made the movie he had to make. We first see Luca, Paguro, at the bottom of the ocean in the movie. He is around 13 years old. He is a young sea monster with green scales and big eyes that shined with a mix of curiosity and restraint that makes him who he is. He takes care of a herd of goatfish every day. These are the little pink fish with mustaches that swim along the bottom of the ocean like goats. Luca leads them, counts them one at a time, does everything well, on time, and without complaining. But Luca's mind is never completely at the bottom of the ocean. He always goes to the edge of the ocean when he can. The line that separates the deep-sea monsters from the shallow water where people live. Luca's favorite place is this part of the water that is clearer and brighter, where the sun shines down on it like gold. Not because he wants to cross, not because he wants to do something bad, but you can see things there at that edge. An old bottle, a bicycle wheel covered in algae, and a clock that has stopped are all things that slowly sink into the ground. Things from the world above that come down there like messages from a civilization that Luca isn't supposed to know about. He gathers these things, keeps them hidden, looks at them with the quiet intensity of someone who is studying something much bigger than they can understand. The main thing that happens in the first part of the movie is that Luca is a smart boy who has a lot of questions, but the world doesn't have any answers to the ones he really wants to ask. Daniela and Lorenzo, Puggy-Roe, are his parents, and they are the living example of a kind of love that suffocates without meaning to. Daniela is a woman who is all about protecting her son. There are rules for her. She makes lists. She tells scary stories about what people do to see monsters when they catch them. Luca has heard these stories, whether they are true or not, so many times that they have become the invisible walls that show him what he can and can't do. Lorenzo is less militant, softer, and more easily distracted than Daniela when it comes to using fear, but he agrees with her deep down. Luca grows up in a world where every limit has a reason. Every no has a scary story behind it, and curiosity is seen as a risk instead of a good thing. This building is very accurate. People who have been kids before know what it is right away, so the script doesn't need to explain it. Everyone had some form of this overprotective behavior when they were kids. It might not have been as extreme, but it had the same emotional structure. And what Casarosa is saying here is not that Luca's parents are bad people. No, they aren't. They are people who love deeply and show that love by trying to control what can go wrong. The world doesn't fit inside that kind of control, though, and Luca already knows this deep down. When he meets Alberto Scafano, things change. Alberto seems to be invading Luca's herding area by chasing the fish in a chaotic and happy way. It's clear right away that Alberto is very different from Luca in almost every way. Alberto is impulsive, while Luca is careful. Alberto has already been and come back, but Luca is still thinking about it. Luca has to follow other people's rules. But Alberto seems to have decided very early on that rules are just suggestions, that he can ignore. Alberto, on the other hand, has something Luca never had: experience. He has already been to the surface. A lot of times, he doesn't see the world above as an abstract threat. He sees it as a real place with smells, textures, and a kind of light that doesn't exist underwater. Alberto tells Luca the most important secret about being a sea monster: when you leave the water and dry off, you become a human. The scales go away. The skin changes. The eyes change. You look like a regular person until the first drop of rain or seawater hits your skin and breaks the spell. One of the most beautifully made scenes in the movie is when Luca finds out about this for the first time. Casarosa and his team took something that could have been boring screenwriting, mechanics and explanation of the rules of the world, and turned it into something amazing. You feel the weight of that news with Luca. Not only is it surprising to learn that the body can do that, but it also means a lot. He can leave. He can see. There was always a door in the world that seemed closed. The first place that to conquer is Alberto's Island, which is a big, flat rock above the sea that people don't usually go to. Alberto lives there by himself in a makeshift nest made of things. He has collected over the years an old armchair, some rusty machinery, and posters that are peeling off the stone walls. Alberto made a home out of trash that people threw away in the world above. He did this without any adults around, which the movie doesn't make a big deal about, but which is very important when you think about it. Alberto is by himself. The movie doesn't say how long it will be, but he is by himself. Alberto shows Luca a picture of a Vespa, which is the main part of the dream that will guide them for the rest of the movie. The Vespa, an Italian scooter that became a symbol of freedom, style, and movement in the 1950s and 1960s, is the emotional MacGuffin of Luca for the two boys. It stands for everything they don't have in their lives: speed, freedom, and the ability to go anywhere they want without asking anyone for permission. Alberto has a clear and impossible goal: to buy a Vespa and travel all over Italy. He doesn't really have a plan. No cash. I don't know how that would really happen. But the picture is real, and that's all that matters. Luca looks at that picture and feels something he didn't know he could feel. The clarity of wanting something with all he has. This sequenced the discovery of the transformation, Alberto's island, and the Vespa on the faded poster was one of the most beautiful scenes that Pixar has ever made. And the beauty of it isn't how complicated it is. It's simple emotions. Anyone who has ever had a friend who opened a new window on the world will know exactly what is going on there. But Luca's reality gets in the way of the two's plans. Daniela finds out that her son has been going to the surface, and her response is exactly what you would expect. She goes into full panic mode. Lorenzo and Sheev come up with a plan to send Luca to live with Uncle Hugo, a character who lives in the ocean's deepest trenches, where it's almost completely dark and his skin is so thin that you can see his organs. Uncle Hugo's personality is a mix of well-meaning weirdness and total sadness. It looks like protection, but it's really punishment. Taking the boy away from the surface by putting him in a place where the surface isn't even an option. And this is where Luca makes the choice that shapes the whole movie. He runs away before being sent to the depths, but only for a short time. He travels to Alberto's island. The two agree that the only way out is to go to Portoroso, the nearby human town, make enough money to buy a Vespa, and then disappear before his parents can find them. The plan is completely crazy, poorly thought out, and based almost entirely on hope and desperation. But it's the only plan that exists, and this is when you finally get what the movie is really about. This is not a movie about monsters in the sea. This isn't a movie set in Italy. It's a movie about what happens when you want to see more of the world and you are afraid to leave. It's about the moment when being yourself becomes more important than being who other people want you to be. Luca jumps into the sea toward Portoroso, not looking back, with Alberto by his side, and summer starts. Portoroso looks like it was made just for two boys who ran away from home to find it. It is a small town with a lot of color and noise that is in the right rhythm. It's not the chaotic noise of big cities. It's the organic noise of a place where everyone knows each other, where life happens on the street, and where the smell of fresh fish and tomatoes cooking in olive oil mixes with the sea. Salt to make something that is both food and landscape. The houses are stacked on top of each other in yellow, orange, and terracotta. The stairs are not wide and even. The boats in the port gently hit the rocks, making a sound like wood on water that sounds like a metronome of everyday life. Luca and Alberto get to Portoroso, drenched, with human faces and clothes they made up, and no idea how the world they just entered works. The first thing the world above teaches us is that looking human doesn't mean you know what it means to be human. The two boys run into customs, language, social norms, food, money. Everything that was once an image or object at a safe distance from the bottom of the sea is now a real experience that could go wrong at any time. And Luca takes it all in, at a terrifyingly fast rate, like someone whose mind has been kept away for a long time waiting for new information. They meet Giulia Marco Valdo in Portoroso. Massimo Marco Valdo, the most respected and scary fisherman in town, is Giulia's father. Massimo doesn't say much, but he has a big arm and scars from working at sea for years. He also has a big grumpy cat named Machiavelli who seems to have an opinion on everything and everyone. Massimo's looks are meant to scare people, and they do. But anyone who pays close attention to the movie will see that the man has a lot of tenderness, even before the movie shows it. This tenderness is hidden under layers of silence that aren't coldness, but rather the emotional language of someone who never learned how to say, "I love you." Giulia's personality is very different from her father's. She is full of energy, opinions, and a need to prove something. Her hair is red and goes in all directions. She talks in a way that doesn't stop, moving from one topic to the next. And she has one very clear goal: to win the Portoroso Cup every year. The Portoroso Cup is a triathlon race in town where people swim, bike, and eat. The winner gets a trophy, money, and, most importantly, the chance to say they beat Ercole Visconti. Because Ercole Visconti has won the race the last 2 years and has made sure that everyone in town knows about it all year long. Ercole is Luca's enemy, but he is smarter than he looks at first. He is the typical local bully, wealthy, good-looking in a way that he knows how to use, and always with 2 obedient goons named Ciccio and Guido. He rides a red Vespa scooter that he uses more as a status symbol than as a way to get around. He humiliates with style, picks his victims carefully, and has that special trait of successful bullies. He knows exactly where to hit to make it hurt the most. But what makes Ercole interesting is what he stands for in the movie. He is the character who is most afraid of sea monsters. He hates them more than is normal. And this level of hatred, this willingness to make others angry at what he calls a threat, says more about who Ercole is than anything else. The movie doesn't make you see fear as anger, but it does put it there for anyone who wants to. Giulia makes a deal. She and Luca and Alberto will run the race together, and if they win, they will get enough money to buy a Vespa and share the glory of knocking Ercole off his 2-year throne. The math is easy for Luca and Alberto. It's harder for Giulia because she has to prove something to her father, who never said it out loud but makes it clear that the race is too dangerous for her. And that is how the team comes together. The next part of the movie is the best part, and it's also where the tensions that will cause everything to fall apart later start to build up without anyone noticing. They all train together. Luca learns to ride a bike at an incredible speed. This is because his mind, which has been absorbing everything from the bottom of the sea for years, can now access the real world and devour it. Luca finds books in the Marco Valdo house, where Giulia is hosting them at night. This moment when Luca finds Giulia's makeshift library full of books about astronomy, math, science, and explorations, a silent turning point that the movie lets happen almost without comment. Luca picks up a book about astronomy and reads it. He picks up another one, grabs one more, and as he reads, you can see a change in his eyes that goes deeper than anything that has happened in the movie so far. It's not a surprise. It's a sign of respect. It was like every word in those books confirmed something he had always known but didn't know how to say. Giulia sees this. And it's her idea, with no bad intentions, that a boy like him should go to school. She really wants the best for him. Giulia's school in Genoa, where she will study for the rest of the year. A school with real teachers, big libraries, and all. The knowledge that Luca spent his whole life trying to get to from the edges. The idea hits Luca like a second revelation. Larger than the Vespa, more than the race. Not running away from the world on a scooter, but learning about it from the inside out with the help of formal education, with discipline and curiosity. But this is where the movie starts to build up. The tension that will explode later. Before Luca does, Alberto sees that Luca has changed. He sees his friend reading, talking to Giulia about stars and planets, and looking forward to the future with a shine that Luca never had in his eyes when they talked about the Vespa and Alberto, who grew up alone and doesn't have any family. Built the only stability in his life around the idea that he and Luca would be partners forever in this adventure. Now he starts to feel that thing that is very hard to name when you're 13, but that adults know right away. The fear of being left by someone you love. Alberto doesn't know how to say this. He doesn't have the emotional tools to deal with, what he's feeling in a good way. He has a tendency to act on impulse and an instinct for self-preservation that shows up as sabotage. While all of this is going on between the two boys, the sea brings another problem to Portoroso. After finding out that their son is missing, Daniela and Lorenzo Paguro come to town disguised as humans, just like Luca, and with the same powers to change things. They are determined to get him back. The scene where they pretend to be Italian tourists while searching the town for their son is funny because it comes from real love. They don't pose a threat. These parents are just doing what desperate parents do, whatever it takes. Portoroso, which looked like a stage for a summer race, turns into a force field where all the story's threads pull in different directions. Luca is stuck between the friend who set him free and the life that freedom made him think about. Alberto loves Luca, but he is afraid that this love won't be enough to keep him close. Giulia is stuck between the dream of the race and the realization that the friends she made might be more than just people to train with. And Ercole is there, shining on his red Vespa, sure that he will win again. It's only the start of summer. In Portoroso, and in the Italian sun, which only summer knows how to do, everything is about to get more beautiful and more complicated at the same time. There is no noise when the rupture happens. It happens like the most painful things usually do. When someone is scared and under a lot of stress, they make the worst choice for the most human reason. The Portoroso Cup is coming up soon. The training is going well. Luca found out that he is an amazing cyclist. His analytical mind and body that learned to move quickly in the world above made him a great cyclist. Alberto takes care of the swimming part, which is easy for him because he's a sea creature pretending to be a human. Giulia, on the other hand, has to eat a huge amount of pasta that the race requires, which she does with a determination that is both funny and impressive. The team is doing its job, but it works. Even though there is a lot of tension underneath, Luca is spending more and more time with Giulia, talking about science, the stars, and the school in Genoa. Alberto sees each of these talks as proof of his biggest fear, that Luca is discovering a world that doesn't need him, that the friendship that seemed to be the most important thing is now just a small part of a bigger world that Luca is making without telling him. Alberto tries to talk. Not with those words. He doesn't have those words. He does what he knows how to do. He acts, shows up, and insists on sticking to the plan. The Vespa, the street, the two of them together with no school, no rules, and no Giulia. That's what he wants. He doesn't know how to want anything else. Luca, on the other hand, is starting to realize that he wants different things, but doesn't know how to tell his only friend without hurting him. This tension reaches its breaking point in a scene that is both the most painful and the most honest in the movie. Alberto makes a choice that he probably knows is wrong right away. He tells Giulia who he is. He lets the water fall on his arm in front of her and shows her how it changes his. Human skin turns into the green scales of the sea monster. The reason, which is never said out loud but is easy to understand, is that Giulia will leave if she knows they are sea monsters. Luca isn't going anywhere if Giulia leaves. The plan for school in Genoa is ruined. The Vespa, the road, and the two of them are all back to normal. It's a betrayal. Alberto knows that this is a betrayal, and he still does it. The next part of the movie shows how brave it is. Julia doesn't scream and run away. She stays. She was surprised and scared for a second, but she stays. And that reaction says everything about who Julia is. But Luca, who saw Alberto reveal himself and is now face to face with the thing he feared most being found out, exposed, and having everything he built in Portoroso fall apart, does something that will cost him a lot. He says no. He tells Julia that Alberto is lying, that he isn't a monster from the sea, that Alberto is the only monster. This is the most complicated turn for Luca as a character. What he does isn't just cowardice. There's real fear of survival mixed in there. The instinct of someone who has spent their whole life learning that being found means danger. But it's also a choice that puts Alberto in danger for his own safety. And Alberto, who did a terrible thing for love, ends up being left alone for love. The two break up. Alberto is gone. Luca stays. This scene is shot in a way that is very different from the rest of the movie, which is bright and colorful. There isn't a storm in the sky or a swelling soundtrack to let you know that something important happened. The colors don't change much. There are only two boys at the end of the day, and the space between them is getting bigger. In interviews, Casarosa said that this was the hardest part of the script to balance, because the audience needed to understand both sides without making a clear judgment on either one. Alberto did something bad. Luca did something bad. Neither of them is a bad guy. Both are kids with real fears, and they act like kids with real fears do. And the movie doesn't make this easy to fix. It is cloudy on the day before the race. The weather in Portoroso is unpredictable, and this is important because rain means water, and water means change. The weather threat is real and always there. If it rains during the race, it will ruin everything for Luca. Alberto is gone for a while. Luca runs part of the course by himself, carrying the weight of what he did, and then it rains during the race. Not a light rain. Real rain, like the Mediterranean summer rain that comes out of nowhere and soaks everything in seconds. And as Luca pedals as hard as he can, he starts to change. The scales show up on his arms, hands, and face. People in the crowd around him start to notice that something is wrong. Alberto shows up. He hadn't really gone. He didn't leave. He stayed because he can't let Luca go through this alone, no matter how much pain, betrayal, or anything else. This is what he did in response to what happened. Not an easy apology, not a speech to make up, but an action. Alberto shows his love by being there for you when things are hard. Alberto takes care of Luca. He protects himself from the rain by using his own body, which keeps him dry enough to keep going. And because of this, Alberto will inevitably change completely in front of everyone in Portoroso. The scales are right in the middle of the square, right in the middle of the race, and everyone in town can see them. The moment of silence is one of the best parts of the movie. The people in the crowd stop moving. Coraline, who was in the lead and thought he would win again, stops. And then Luca, who saw Alberto give up his life for him for the second time, makes the choice that changes his character. He stops racing. He stops being secretive. He lets the rain come down, and he changes as well, to see monsters in the middle of Portoroso Square, wet with scales and glowing eyes, are facing a whole town that is scared and confused. Coraline grabs his harpoon and moves forward. He always has a harpoon because that's the kind of person he is. The next thing that happens is the end of one of the best woven threads in the movie. Massimo Marco Valdo, Giulia's father, steps between Arcoli and the boys. Massimo, the big, scary man who didn't say much and was in the movie the whole time, just says, "No, Arcoli, no. No to the people." The boys are still there. Then Portoroso makes a decision one by one. Not everyone this movie isn't dumb enough to say that bias goes away right away, but that's enough. Giulia stays. The owner of the gelateria stays. The mechanic is still there. People who lived with Luca and Alberto over the summer without knowing who they were, and who now find out that the friendship was real. The coexistence was real, and the summer was real. Those people stay. Ercole loses, not the race. Giulia finished the race while there was chaos in the square. But he loses in a bigger way. He loses control of the town story. The audience he always had, and the power that came from making people afraid. And for a moment, you can see that under Ercole's arrogance is just a boy who learned that being scary was the only way to fit in. Daniela and Lorenzo, Luca's parents, also come. They saw everything. And there is a time between Daniela and her son when they don't need to talk for long. She sees him, sees who he really is, not the safe, protected, and contained version she raised. The true version. The one who went to Portoroso, found books, made friends, ran a race, made good and bad choices, and had the best summer of his life. And she gives him a hug. Luca's resolution isn't a win for the pamphlet. There are real losses. And real wins, and the victories are real. Alberto stays in Portoroso, where Massimo hires him to help with fishing. This is the first stable home Alberto has ever had. Luca goes to Genoa to study with Giulia. They break up, and this separation, which could be the sad end of the story, is shown as a beginning, as proof that that summer changed them both forever. Even though their paths are now going in different directions, Luca's train leaves the station in the last shot of the movie. Alberto stays on the dock. They stare at each other. You know, without having to say a word, that this is the kind of friendship that doesn't need to be around all the time to be real. It's the end of summer, but the summer stayed. Enrico Casarosa made one of the smartest choices when making Luca. By choosing the original English voice actors, having beautiful voices wasn't enough. It was important for the voices to sound like real kids with real flaws, and to have that quality of spontaneity that makes you feel like you're watching an animated character and not just seeing one. The original English voice of Luca Paglioro is Jacob Tremblay. If you know Tremblay's work as a live-action actor, you probably already know why this choice makes so much sense. For example, in the 2017 movie Wonder, he played Augie Pullman, a boy with a rare facial condition who was starting his first year in a regular school. Tremblay is a rare young actor because he doesn't act out emotions, he lives them. He speaks with a calmness that is just right for Luca, the boy who feels everything deeply but is still learning how to put his feelings into words. Casarosa's direction with Tremblay was exactly what they wanted, to make Luca's pauses as expressive as his lines. When Luca hesitates before answering, when his voice goes up a pitch, when the animation explodes in excitement, and when his breathing changes when fear shows up. All of these things were carefully planned out during the recording sessions so that you can feel them without knowing it. Jack Dylan Grazer, who voiced Alberto Scorfano, brought something completely different and just as important. Grazer is best known for playing Eddie Casbroke in the It movies 2017 and 2019. He was a member of the Losers Club who used sarcasm and a lot of medical jargon to make up for his fear. In Alberto, he found the opposite of what he did in it. Eddie talks to hide his fear, but Alberto talks because he really isn't afraid or pretends to be so convincingly that he gets the same result. Grazer's voice as Alberto has a physical quality that is not common in voice acting. He doesn't just say the lines, he throws them. Grazer captures the body impulse in Alberto's lines in a way that makes perfect sense when you see how the character moves, jumps, and acts before he thinks. And in the quieter scenes, when Alberto is really scared not of physical danger, but of the kind of fear that doesn't have an easy name, Grazer finds a vulnerability that is probably the hardest part of the character to play and the most beautiful. To hear Emma Berman made her acting debut as Giulia Marco Valdo in Luca. It was a choice that put being real ahead of being famous. Berman wasn't a well-known star when she was cast. She was chosen because her voice had the kind of unstoppable excitement that Giulia needed to have. Giulia is the kind of person who fills in the blanks in conversation not because she is insecure, but because she has a lot to say. She thinks a lot, feels a lot, and wants a lot. And Berman's voice is just that, full, warm, and quick, but not nervousness. It's intelligence working in real time. Maya Rudolph plays Daniela Paguro, and Jim Gaffigan plays Lorenzo Paguro. They are a couple who make us laugh without losing the emotional weight. Rudolph, a comedian and longtime Saturday Night Live actress, gave Daniela an almost operatic intensity that made every sentence sound like a declaration. Daniela says that people are dangerous in a way that makes it sound like she knows from experience, with the kind of certainty that only the worst fears can give. Rudolph makes Daniela's overprotectiveness funny without making her a stereotype. You can laugh at her and understand her at the same time, which is a very hard balance to strike. Jim Gaffigan plays Lorenzo, who is the perfect opposite, slower, friendlier, and more willing to go with the flow. Gaffigan's voice always sounds a little surprised with himself, as if Lorenzo never really knew how he got where he is but doesn't mind. One of the funniest parts of the movie is when he and Daniela come to Portoroso dressed as humans and try to fit in with the town's daily life. A lot of that is thanks to Gaffigan's voice, as Massimo Marcovaldo. Marco Baracelli gave one of the best and most cost-effective voice performances of the whole cast. Baracelli has been acting in theatre and on TV for a long time, and you can tell in every line of Massimo. Baracelli knows that Massimo's power comes from what he doesn't say, because the character doesn't say much. Massimo's silence is heavy. When he finally does something, when he steps between Arcali and the boys at the end of the race, the action has the weight it does because Baracelli spent the whole movie making a character who is strong and not just talk. Saverio Raimondo plays Ercole Visconti. Raimondo is an Italian comedian, and it was a great idea to cast a native Italian as the movie's villain. An Italian speaking English or Portuguese has a musicality and rhythm of speech that carries the culture of origin in a way that can't be copied. And this quality gives Ercole an authenticity of character that an American actor just couldn't do in the same way. But the Brazilian Portuguese dubbing is the version that matters to Brazilian fans. And this is where the movie did something really beautiful. In Brazil, Rodrigo Caggiano voiced Luca. Caggiano is one of the best voice actors of his generation in the country. He has played young characters in many Disney and Pixar movies. His performance as Luca perfectly captures the character's anxious restraint. Keiji voice as Luca is soft but never weak, hesitant but never unsure, and when the animation calls for it, he shows real enthusiasm. Pedro Miranda gave Alberto the voice in Brazil, and he gave the character the big energy that Alberto needs. The Brazilian version of Alberto has a certain warmth, the way he talks, with confidence and swagger, that fits the animation's rhythm perfectly. The line Silenzio Bruno comes out just right when Alberto says it in Brazilian Portuguese for the first time. One thing that stands out in the Brazilian dubbing of Luca is that Claudia Raia and her daughter Sofia Raia worked on it together. Claudia Raia is one of Brazil's most famous actresses. She has been on TV and in theaters for decades, and having her in the cast made the national dubbing of the movie even more popular. The mother-daughter duo's involvement in Luca got a lot of attention because it was so emotionally powerful. A mother and daughter working together on a movie about family, separation, and having the strength to let the people we love move on. Luca's group singing needs to be talked about in a way that goes beyond any one person's analysis. The movie sounds like friendship. That seems clear, but it's very hard to do. In English, Tremblay and Grazer's scenes, and in Portuguese, Caggiano and Miranda's scenes, have that natural overlap where two characters are in the same soundscape without either of them just waiting for their turn to speak. They talk to each other. They cut in. They laugh at the right time. To get this level of naturalness in animation dubbing, you need very precise direction and actors who can switch from technical mode to being really present. Casaros ran the recording sessions with this dynamic in mind. He insisted on recording Tremblay and Grazer together whenever he could, even though it's normal for most animation productions to record the actors separately for logistical reasons. Every time Luca and Alberto talk to each other, you can feel the effects of that choice. Editing can't make the reality of two bodies in the same room. This is what makes Luca go from being a pretty movie to one that sticks with you. The feeling that there is real life on the other side of the voices. At the very beginning of Luca, the camera slowly rises from the bottom of the ocean to the surface. The water changes from a deep, almost opaque blue to a turquoise green that gets lighter and lighter until the sunlight from the war Mediterranean starts to shine through in golden beams. Then, for the first time, you see Portoroso up there, far away, a group of colorful shapes against the summer sky. This shot only lasts a few seconds, but it shows everything the movie needs to show about how the world was built. Two universes with different languages, separated by a surface that is both a barrier and a portal. Enrico Casarosa made it very clear to his art team what he wanted. Luca couldn't be made with the hyper-realistic style that Pixar had been working on in recent years. Movies like Coco and Soul spent a lot of time on the physical details of the characters, like hair with individual strands, fabrics that felt real, and surfaces with tiny flaws. Luca had to be the exact opposite. More paint, at times flatter. Faces and bodies are more expressive and less realistic. The main source of inspiration was classic Italian comics from the 1940s and 1950s, especially the drawings by Attilio Massino and the covers of post-war Italian Riviera variety magazines. It had the look of a summer poster, bright colors that weren't fluorescent, clean lines, and a visual joy that didn't try to be deep but was really pretty. Casarosa wanted every frame of Luca to look like a summer picture, like the way old pictures of happy memories from childhood vacations filled Ottanella Strelava. The production designer was in charge of making the film's world look real. Before the pandemic stopped travel, Strelava worked with a team that made several research trips to the Cinque Terre and other villages on the Italian Riviera. These trips resulted in hundreds of photo references, architectural sketches, studies of light at different times of the day, and catalogues of color palettes by season and hour. Portoroso was built with this material in a way that goes beyond what is necessary, and that is what makes the town feel real. Not real like a picture, but real like a memory. Real like a place you've been before and know about before you get there. The buildings in Portoroso are inspired by real villages, but they don't copy any of them directly. The port is based on Vernassa. There are parts of Portofino in the main square. The narrow stairs remind me of Manerola. The town is both specific and universal. It looks like a real Italian town, but anyone could feel like they grew up in a place like that. The way the human characters were designed at Pixar was different from how they usually do it. Casarosa and his character design team did the opposite of what most people do. They started with the most expressive shape they could think of, and then added human traits from there. For example, Julia was made from a triangle. In a literal sense, her hair looks like a triangle. The way she stands makes a triangle. When she rests, her body makes a triangle shape in the frame. This basic shape gives the character a visual consistency that you can feel but can't put into words. She always looks like herself, no matter what pose or angle she is in. Massimo was made up of rectangles. He is solid, square, and can't be moved, and the way he looks makes this clear before he even speaks. Ercole's body was shaped like an upside-down V, with wide shoulders that get smaller as they go down. He always looks like he's showing something off. The base geometry of each character tells you everything you need to know about them. The sea monsters were a different, more difficult problem. It was important to make creatures that were clearly not human, but could still feel emotions like humans. It was interesting how the team came up with the solution. They made the characters out of clay first, and then modeled them digitally. They made physical models of Luca and Alberto as sea monsters, with hand-textured scales, painted eyes, and three-dimensional expressions that could be seen in real light. This analog step in the digital animation process showed shape and volume, qualities that the computer alone couldn't have suggested. It also gave the final models an organic feel that you can feel on screen but can't explain where it comes from. The scales on Luca's body are green with gold reflections. Alberto's are teal with more blue tones. Daniela's are darker and deeper, like creatures that live in the deeper, older ocean. Each family of sea monsters has its own color scheme that tells the story of where they came from without words. Another big technical and artistic problem was how to switch between the sea monster and the human forms. The change happens quickly when the character gets out of the water, but it happens more slowly and dramatically when it happens in the rain in front of people. The team made a digital particle system that mimics how water evaporates from the skin and takes the scales with it. The result is both convincing as a mechanic and beautiful as an image. These transitions have a certain shine that makes me think of both magic and science, but none of Luca's visual parts work on their own. Don Roma wrote the soundtrack, and everything talks to it. The conversation is so close that it's hard to Tell where the image ends and the music starts. Some people in the industry were surprised at first that Roma was chosen. He didn't have a lot of experience with big-budget animation, but Casarosa chose him after hearing his work in movies like Beasts of the Southern Wild and Maniac. These movies showed that he could make music that felt alive, like it was breathing with the characters instead of just accompanying them. Roma wrote a score for an 82-piece orchestra for Luca, but the sound of the movie doesn't come from any of the instruments you'd expect to hear in a symphony orchestra. It's the accordion. The accordion is the Italian Riviera's main instrument. People sing it at the end of the day when they are fishing, at village festivals, and at port attractions. Roma didn't use the accordion as a cultural reference. Instead, he used it as the main voice, the instrument that carries the emotional memory of the place the movie is trying to make. You are in Italy when the accordion starts to play. Not the Italy that tourists see on postcards, but the Italy that Casarosa remembers from his own life, the summer that changed him, the streets he ran, and the sea that called to him from afar. There are layers to Roma's score. The accordion layer holds everything in place and time. The strings carry the emotional weight, especially in the scenes between Luca and Alberto, where the music knows when to pull back and when to push forward, almost like a person. It has drums that give the action scenes of the race a beat without making them seem like pointless show. And it has parts where there is almost no sound, with very simple, almost childish melodies that match the parts of the movie where it is most honest about how it feels. The music that plays when Luca finds the books at Giulia's house is very beautiful. It is a short, shy melody that gets bigger over time, but not too big, as if the score itself knew that this moment doesn't need to be grand. It needs room. There are also a lot of classic Italian songs in the movie, especially pop songs from the 1950s and 1960s. Un bacio, A mezzanotte volere, and other songs don't just serve as nostalgic decorations. They are part of Portoroso's soundscape. They are songs that would naturally be playing on an open-window radio in a town like that at that time. The film has a completely unique visual and sonic identity within Pixar's catalog because of all the visual design, architecture, characters in expressive geometry, glowing transformations, a saturated summer palette, and an accordion and string score that breathes with the story. Luca is not like any other Pixar movie. And that might be the best thing you can say about the people who made it. Luca was in the middle of making it in March 2020, when the whole world shut down and being alone became the new normal. Pixar had made movies that were hard to watch before. It had been through full script rewrites just a few months before it came out, just like Ratatouille. It had changed whole characters in the middle of production, like an Inside Out, but it had never tried to make a full-length animated movie with its whole team working from home on personal computers, talking to each other through video calls, and trying to keep the story and visuals of the whole movie consistent while never being in the same room. Luca was the first Pixar movie that was mostly made at the homes of its employees. Very few people outside the industry really understand what this meant in practice. Making high-quality animation is a very collaborative process. Modelers, animators, lighting supervisors, effects teams, virtual directors of photography, music composers, and editors all need to be in sync all the time, checking each other's work and making changes on the fly. This process usually takes place in big rooms with walls covered in concept art and special workstations that each cost tens of thousands of dollars. It was happening all of a sudden in bedrooms, at dining tables, and in makeshift offices in the corners of apartments, with kids in the background asking for attention. Enrico Casarosa said that this time was both the hardest and the most revealing for the production. It was hard for the obvious reasons. The logistics were a constant nightmare, and what used to be instant communication in a hallway turned into a scheduled meeting on a screen. But it was revealing because the fact that the whole team was alone in real life made the main theme of the movie they were making more relevant. There were hundreds of people on this team, each behind a screen, interacting with the world through an interface that hid who they were in real life. The messy house, behind the camera filter, the pajamas under the t-shirt, and the uncombed hair. The movie they were making was about creatures that had to hide who they were to live in other people's worlds. This coincidence, if it was a coincidence, and not the kind of convergence that happens when a theme is deeply true, gave the team a connection with the material that probably wouldn't have existed in the same way under normal production conditions. During this time, Pete Docter, Pixar's chief creative officer, was in charge of the project. Docter, who made movies like Monsters, Inc., Up, and Soul, strongly believed in what Casarosa was doing, and used his position to protect the director's vision from the inevitable pressures that come with a studio, spending tens of millions of dollars on a product that can only be fully evaluated when it's done. Before the pandemic, Luca had already gone on research trips to Italy that inspired his visual design. This was a huge stroke of luck, because without them, the film would have lost one of its best features, its geographic specificity. The team came back from the Cinque Terre Porto Venori and Sestri Levante with a lot of reference materials. They had pictures of every angle of every village, recordings of the sounds of the ports, color samples of the facades, and sketches of the evening light over the sea. This material survived the end of the world and kept the production going during the pandemic months, like a reserve of reality when it was hard to find. People who are looking for it can see a layer of Luca that is hidden. This layer is full of hidden details. Pixar has been putting Easter eggs in their movies since the first Toy Story, and Luca is no different. The number A113 is the most well-known Pixar Easter egg. It refers to the classroom at the California Institute of the Arts, where some of Pixar's founders and directors learned how to animate. The number appears in Luca as soon as Luca and Alberto get to Portoroso for the first time, written in a discreet way on a wall in the town. You missed it if you weren't paying attention. It's the kind of thing that makes you smile without even trying. The orange Pizza Planet truck, which has been in almost every Pixar movie since the first Toy Story, is parked on one of Portoroso's streets during the race scene in Luca. It is a background detail that you can see for a second and has nothing to do with the plot, and very important for people who believe in the studio's stories. There are also hints about the larger Pixar universe that are less obvious. There are things on one of the shelves in the Marco Valdo house that are references to other studio movies. The fish that Julia keeps as a pet has markings that look like Nemo's color pattern. The fact that they chose a boy who is very curious about science and the outside world is similar to characters from other Pixar movies, but it doesn't copy any of them. But the most emotional part of Luca isn't something you can see. It's spoken. In the Italian version of the movie, which was the original language of the cultural references and is a special dubbing alongside the English version. Alberto Sarassi, who was Enrico Casarosa's real childhood friend, voiced a fisherman in the Town of Portoroso. There is an anonymous voice in the background of the movie that sounds like the person who inspired the character, Alberto Scorfano. You hear the movie differently when you know that Casarosa has never hidden how much Hayao Miyazaki has influenced Luca, and it's worth going into more detail than just saying Studio Ghibli. In interviews, Casarosa was clear about which Miyazaki movies influenced his work. Castle in the Sky, 1986, was mentioned as a direct reference, because it is about a kid's boy and a girl who have to deal with a world that is bigger and more dangerous than they can understand, with only friendship and bravery to help them. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, 1984, was brought up because of how it shows the relationship between people and creatures that people are afraid of but don't understand. This is very similar to the sea monsters in Luca, but Miyazaki's impact goes beyond the story. It's how Luca sees the physical world as a character. You can almost feel the wind on your skin in Miyazaki's movies. It seems like water knows what it's doing. Even though it's animated, the food looks good enough to make you hungry. Casarosa brought this feeling to Luca. The sun in Portoroso is hot. The sea is deep. The smell of Giulia's food, especially the pasta with pesto, is almost captured in the movie. One interesting fact about Luca that shows how important it was to be real to the whole production is that the art team looked into not only the architecture and landscape of the Cinque Terre, but also the recipes. The food in the movie, like the fresh pasta dumplings Daniela makes at the bottom of the sea before Luca leaves, the dishes Giulia serves at her father's table, and the gelato that shows up in a few scenes in Portoroso, all came from real Ligurian recipes. The food in the movie isn't just Italian food. It is a type of food from the Genoese Riviera, a region in Italy known for its fresh fish, pesto, and focaccia. This type of food is not found anywhere else in Italy. You never see this much detail in the movie's main story. No one in the story stops to explain where the dishes came from. But it's there, and all the little things like this add up to make Portoroso feel like a real place that someone could find. A less well-known fact about the movie is that Casarosa originally thought of it as something even more limited, more like a long short film than a regular feature. During development, there was a lot of pressure for a longer story arc, with more events and surprises. And what made it to the big screen is the result of a careful balance between Casarosa's original idea for a small movie about a summer and the studio's need for its movies to make back the money it spent on production and marketing, which in the case of Luca was about $80 million. It is a rare achievement for the world to see and recognize that Casarosa was able to keep the original idea's intimacy despite these pressures. Luca came to Disney Plus on Friday, June 18th, 2021, at no extra cost to subscribers. Not released in theaters in the US. No lines. There isn't a set way that most people experience a big Pixar release, like a dark room and popcorn. Disney made the choice back in March 2021, when it became clear that the pandemic was still making theatrical releases unpredictable, especially for movies aimed at families with young children. In September 2020, Disney tried out the premium streaming model with Mulan, which costs extra on top of the subscription. Later, in December 2020, Soul came out for free to subscribers and became a huge hit on the platform. Luca did what Soul did. In interviews, Enrico Casarosa was honest about how he felt when the news came out. It wasn't easy. Luca is a summer movie set in the Mediterranean, It should be seen on a big screen, where the colors are bright and the sun feels real. He needed to think about the idea that the movie would go straight to people's TVs at home, without the usual dark room ritual. But Casarosa also said that, given what was going on in the world in 2021, it was poetically right for Luca, a movie about finding comfort in people's homes and making friends when you're vulnerable, to come right into families' living rooms. And the numbers showed that the choice worked out in a way that no one had thought it would. Nielsen data from 2021 shows that Luca had more than 10.6 billion viewing minutes on Disney Plus in its first month on the platform. Soul, which came out on Christmas 2020 with a huge awards campaign and amazing critical coverage, got about 1.6 billion minutes in its first weekend. During that time, Luca beat out almost all of the other movies on the platform, even those that had a lot more marketing noise and awards recognition. People left. They left without a red carpet, without a ceremony, and without a sound. The reviews were mostly positive, but they all said that Luca is small. The Tomatometer gave Rotten Tomatoes a score of 91%, which is certified fresh, and the average score was 7.3 out of 10. The site's critics agreed that Luca was slight, but full of infectious joy. This shows that Pixar can make a safe movie that appeals to people of all ages. Metacritic gave it a score of 71 out of 100, which means that most reviews were good. It's interesting what this language shows. Little, safe, not much. Critics used these words not as insults, but with a hint of doubt that says more about the high standards Pixar has set over the years than about Luca itself. The studio that made the beginning of Up, the end of Toy Story 3, and Inside Out with almost surgical emotional accuracy set the bar so high that a 91% movie on Rotten Tomatoes can be called safe. But if you look more closely at the individual reviews, you'll see something else. Keith Watson from Slant Magazine said that Luca is by far the most personal and relaxed work from Pixar since Ratatouille. Rob Hunter from Film School Rejects said, Luca leans into a much lighter tone, but it is no less memorable. And a phrase that got a lot of play during the premiere. The last 15 minutes of Luca might go down in history as one of the best endings Pixar has ever made. This line between small and extraordinary is what makes Luca a work of art, and is probably what will keep it around for a long time. Luca was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature Film and an Oscar in the same category. During the awards seasons of 2021 and 2022, Disney's Encanto and the Danish animated documentary Flea were also in the running for the award. Encanto won both the Golden Globe and the Oscar, not Luca. But the fact that Luca was on both lists showed that the industry thought the movie was of high quality, even though the award season was focused on other movies. In the months and years after Luca came out, there was a lot of talk about it, and it deserves to be given the attention it needs. The LGBTQIA+ community loved the movie because it used the metaphor of sea. Monstrous creatures who hide who they are from the world to be accepted, who live in constant fear of being discovered, and who find in the right friends the only space where they can be completely themselves. This is a direct allegory for growing up with an identity that the society around you is not ready to accept. Casarosa was very kind in response to this reading. He said he didn't make the movie with that goal in mind, but he likes any interpretation the audience comes up with. A metaphor that means something to one person about one thing and something else to another person about something else is not a weak metaphor. It's a powerful metaphor. The best stories speak on frequencies that different people hear in different ways, and all of them are true at the same time. This interpretation of Luca also led to a bigger discussion about how Disney and Pixar have handled stories with LGBTQIA+ characters and themes. This was a debate that was going on long before Luca came out, but the movie added to it in a useful way. No matter what Casarosa meant to do when he made the movie, Luca became an emotional meeting place for a generation of viewers who saw themselves in it in a way that goes far beyond an Italian summer. Pixar put out the short film Ciao Alberto on Disney Plus in November 2021. It is a direct sequel to Luca and takes place after the events of the main movie. McKenna Harris wrote and directed the short, which is about 20 minutes long. It follows Alberto in Portoroso, while Luca is in Genoa with Giulia. Alberto works at Massimo's fish shop and is desperate to win over the man of few words who has become his mentor and father figure, though neither of them calls him that. The short is smaller than the movie in terms of story, but it packs a lot of emotion into a small space. Ciao Alberto gives the relationship between Alberto and Massimo to people who desperately need a father figure and found each other through a long and winding road. The space that the main movie didn't have. The title of the short in Brazilian Portuguese means hi, Alberto, in a casual way, not ciao in Italian. This is a good example of how the story is told. The same warmth, but in a different language. Luca had a limited release in theaters in the United States in March 2024. This was part of a Disney plan to bring some of its streaming movies back to theaters. The movie came out in 1,390 theaters in the US and made about $550,000 in its first weekend. The numbers weren't the best ever, but the people who went did so on purpose. They wanted to see a movie they already knew by heart on a big screen, to have the experience. The movie never had the right to have in 2021. That Lucas started this movement. People left their homes to pay for a ticket to see a movie they could have watched for free at home. Says something important. Not about the box office, about attachment. About the kind of movie that people need to see on a big screen, not because they want to be impressed, but because they want to fully enjoy something they love. In 2026, Luca is firmly a part of Pixar's emotional canon. Not the most awards, not the most impressive from a technical point of view, not the one that makes the most people cry at the end, but maybe the most loved in the most specific way. The closest thing to a personal memory that makes me feel good long after the screen goes dark. So what is Luca really? Not the pitch, not the short summary, not the one that is on the Disney Plus banner. What is Luca when you are completely honest about it and are willing to say what is good and what could have been better? Let's begin with what works. And a list of technical things done well isn't what works in Luca. An emotional coherence that runs through the whole movie. From the first frame to the last is something that is harder to make and less common. The stylized visual design, the bright summer colors, the accordion score, and the small scale of the story all serve the same main purpose in Luca. Everything is pointing in the same direction. Different things say the same thing. This coherence and unity of vision is what sets a director apart from others who didn't know what movie they wanted to make before they started making it. Casarosa gets the texture of friendship just right. That's the main point of the movie, and it's where it really shines. There aren't any big speeches or dramatic moments that make Luca and Alberto's relationship work. It's made up of little things, like how Alberto teaches Luca to ride down a hill with his arms open as if he were going to fly. How Luca stands up for Alberto in front of Ercole with a strength that surprises him, and how the two of them make the Silenzio Bruno ritual together as a private language that only they understand. That private language, the jokes, references, and rituals that only friends share is one of the most real things about how real friendships work. And Luca captures it with almost documentary-like accuracy. Alberto's story is probably the most interesting in the movie. In the first act, it looks like Alberto is just the brave friend who pushes the protagonist part of the story that helps Luca grow. But the movie slowly shows that Alberto is the character who has the most to lose. He doesn't have any family. He doesn't have a backup plan. If the Vespa plan doesn't work out, he won't have a backup future. Alberto only has his friendship with Luca, and when he realizes that this friendship might not be enough to keep them together forever, he is scared and makes bad choices after that. You don't agree with what Alberto is doing, but you get it. An understanding is more than just agreeing. It's more than what movies usually want from you. The ending of the movie, where Alberto stays in Portoroso with Massimo and Luca goes to Genoa, is one of the most daring story choices in any animated movie in the last few years. It's not the usual happy ending where everything is perfect and everyone leaves together. It is a resolution that needs loss, a friendship that changes but is still real, a separation that proves that summer worked, because if it hadn't, Luca wouldn't have had the guts to leave. The last scene of the movie, with Luca on the train and Alberto on the pier, is just perfect. The look between the two before the window disappears into the distance is perfect. There is no better word. It is perfect in how it doesn't explain what's going on emotionally, how it trusts that the audience knows enough about these two boys to feel the weight of that moment without needing anyone to name it. The movie also does a good job with its secondary characters. Massimo Marcovaldo might have just been a scary adult who eventually becomes an ally because the story needs him to. He is not a character with an exterior. He loves Giulia in silence, and he chooses to stay quiet when any other character would have spoken. He steps between Ercole and the boys without making a heroic speech. All of this makes him a real man, with few layers, but a lot of depth. Like Giulia goes beyond the role of friendly human girl to become a character with her own weaknesses and goals. She needs to prove something to her father and finds in her new friends not only company but also a Meridot. Now for the truth, some people, especially the most picky Pixar fans, have a real problem with Luca that it would be dishonest to ignore. The movie doesn't go as deep as it could. There are times, especially in the second act, when the story chooses to move quickly and be charming, instead of stopping to build up an emotional tension that was already there and ready to explode. The fight between Luca and Alberto, which is the main point of betrayal and abandonment, ends too quickly for the weight the movie built up over the course of several acts. It's over in a flash, and the movie goes on as if it had reached its destination, even though it feels like there was more emotional space that wasn't used. This choice of constant lightness, which is one of the best things about the movie at Woo, many points becomes a problem at this point. Casarosa said out loud that he didn't want to make a movie that made people cry. He wanted to make a movie that would make people happy. That is a real and brave choice for a studio, where the emotional range includes the beginning of Up and the end of Toy Story 3. But it means that Luca loses some emotional power that it could have had. The story of Luca's parents, Daniela and Lorenzo, arriving in Portoroso, fighting with their son, and making up, is also not given enough attention. Daniela is a character with a very interesting emotional arc. She was so protective of her son that she almost lost the chance to really see him. But the movie doesn't have the time or the desire to fully explore this arc. She goes from being an enemy to a friend too quickly for the character to be believable. These are the reservations. And these are real concerns, not just fluff. But when you look at everything, what worked really well, what could have gone deeper, what the movie chose to be and what it chose not to be, what's left is clear. Luca is a great movie. Not everyone will like the movie in the same way. You might feel like something was missing if you go to it expecting the emotional devastation of Soul or the complicated structure of Inside Out. But if you come ready to accept what it really has to offer, short story about a certain summer, two boys learning about the world and each other, and having the courage to be yourself in a world that isn't always ready for it, then Luca does a great job. Who should see Luca? The truthful answer is nearly everyone. The way the movie works depends a lot on who you are when you watch it. It's a summer adventure with monsters, racing, and that friend you wish you had if you're 10 years old. If you're in your 20s, it's a movie about leaving home and finding out who you are when you stop following other people's plans. It's a movie about you, too, about Daniela, and about the fear that comes from love and sometimes stops you from protecting what you love. If you're 40 and look at your kids and realize you're keeping them safe from a world they need to be able to explore, it's a movie about you too. If you loved a friend who made you braver than you would have been alone, like an Alberto who came to visit one summer and pushed you out the window to see what was on the other side, then Luca is the movie for you. Even if Casaro Sa has never met you, even if he was thinking about Genoa's Italian Riviera in the 1970s while he was making the movie, emotional memories are universal because they are unique. They belong to everyone because they were once owned by only one person. Pixar's best movie is not Luca, but it could be the nicest. And sometimes, in the life of a studio, a movie theater, or a viewer, kindness is just what was needed in 2021. The third year of a pandemic that taught the whole world what it's like to be alone, hidden, and scared of what will happen when you go out and show yourself. Luca came on a Friday in June and said, "Go. The world out there is scary and not perfect, and it will soak you to the bone when you least expect it. But it's worth every drop. Shut up, Bruno, and go."